Welcome to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, episode 37. I am your host, Stephanie Corey, filling in for the late Richard Behrens, author of the Lizzie Borden Girl Detective series of mysteries. The Lizzie Borden Podcast is the only podcast entirely devoted to the study of the Borden murders of 1892, Lizzie Borden, the history of her hometown, Fall River, Massachusetts, and sometimes subjects related to 19th century New England. Produced by Nine Muses Books and Anna Behrens. Each episode explores some aspect of the mystery that is Lizzie Borden, from the origins of the doggerel Lizzie Borden Took an Axe to a primer on the case by noted authors and experts, including dramatic readings of Richard Behrens' Lizzie Borden Girl Detective Mystery Series. In this episode, we interview Tracy J. Revels, Sherlockian, author, historian, and professor of humanities at Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, about her unique approach to teaching freshmen to consider how Sherlock Holmes would have investigated the Lizzie Borden case. And now, the Lizzie Borden Podcast presents an interview with Tracy J. Revels. Tracy J. Revels is the Laura and Winston Hoy Professor of Humanities at Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. A native of Madison, Florida, she received her PhD in history from Florida State University in 1990. She's the author of Grander in Her Daughters, Florida's Women During the Civil War, and Sunshine Paradise, A History of Florida Tourism, among others. She also writes Sherlockian fiction, including the supernaturally themed trilogy Shadowfall, Shadowblood, and Shadow Wrath, and the classic pastiche collection Sherlock Holmes, Tales of Light, Shadow, and Darkness. She received her investiture in the Baker Street Irregulars in 2021. Congratulations. Thank you. Proudly serves her local Scion Society, the Survivors of the Glorious God. Dr. Revels teaches classes in American, Southern, and women's history with a specialty in the 19th century. In her freshman seminar, which is based on the Sherlock Holmes story, she asks her students to consider how Sherlock Holmes would have investigated the case of Lizzie Borden. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is a fascinating, I've always wanted to talk to somebody who is on the front lines of the educational world, actually using the case to teach something, not necessarily about the case, because you can't really get a degree in Lizzie Borden studies, of course.
Not yet.
But to use it in a way that furthers some kind of educational purpose or goal. And I think that that's what your course does. While Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character and Lizzie Borden is a real person, Doyle and Lizzie both lived during somewhat the same era. Lizzie lived from 1860 to 1927, and Conan Doyle from 1859 to 1930, pretty much overlapped.
Pretty much.
Conan Doyle would have been well aware of the Borden trial, and a portrait of Lizzie, I understand, hangs in the Rogues Gallery in the Sherlock Holmes Museum in London. So there is some kind of a Lizzie Holmes connection in the consideration of the Sherlockian world. So my first question is, which came first, your interest in Sherlock Holmes or Lizzie Borden?
Well, that one's easy. It was definitely Sherlock first. I like to tell people that I met Sherlock Holmes when I was 11 years old, and I'm an only child, and I grew up in a farm in North Florida. So in the summer, I didn't have playmates. It was sort of at home in the farm all day long, and I love to read. And I happened to stumble upon a high school reader book that had been left there. Of course, at 11, you think you're hot stuff if you can read at the high school level, right? So I opened up the book, and the very first story in the book was The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And I was just enthralled with that story. And I got almost to the end of it, and I stopped, and I was like, wait a minute. And spoiler alert, in case you haven't read this story, could a snake be involved? And of course it was involved. And I felt so smart and so proud of myself. And I looked, and it said at the end that there were 56 stories about Sherlock Holmes and 4 novels written by Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm like, great, I got a lot more to read. And then it was took forever to try to find all of those because this was the pre-internet days and my town's library was very limited. And so I would have to beg to go to a bookstore and look for any book that had a deerstalker hat or a pipe on it. I was just madly collecting. Fortunately, about 2 years later, my mother, I think, was tired of being dragged to every bookstore in creation and bought me the big 2 volume complete canon. And I was just in love, just enthralled. Now, I want to point out I never solved another Sherlock Holmes case.
Oh,
Only got the
okay.
one. But I was so happy with that book and all the footnotes and all the annotations. I still have it. It long ago lost its cover. It's ragged, it's dirty, but I will take it into my class and sort of wave it around and say, this is what love looks like, children. This is it right here, this book. Now, as for Lizzie, I don't really remember the moment that I met Lizzie Borden, but I'm sure it must have been at some point in high school or early college, doing some reading. I always liked sort of tales of mystery, true life mysteries, that sort of thing. But I did really get to know her more when I got into college and started teaching and got really interested in it. And at one point, I went to a Halloween party as Lizzie Borden. I had a full long dress bustle. I had a little axe. I had put paint on it. I had the whole thing. And nobody knew who I was. And I was very upset with that none of my colleagues recognized Lizzie Borden. I'm like, where have you been that you don't know who Lizzie Borden is? Come on, guys. So the interests have come together over time, but I would definitely have to say Sherlock was a little earlier.
Well, it sounds like it at 11. That's
11.
yeah. I remember reading my first Sherlock Holmes too. I do. You don't, it's kind of one of those things that impregnates in your head and stays there because it's a moment.
It is. And then you're so jealous of people when they say, oh, I haven't read it, and they start reading it, and you think, I wish I could have that first time of reading it all over again.
I do that. Yeah, I do that with a lot of movies too. I'm like, oh, I wish I could see this movie afresh.
Exactly.
Well, you teach a course. So tell us a little bit about the course, which is a liberal arts seminar, and it's required, is it not?
Yes, yes, it is required. It's required of all freshmen, but there are, I think, about 26 sections of it.
Oh,
So freshmen have a lot of choice as to what topic they want to take for this seminar. And the idea of the seminar is basically we want to teach you to read at the college level, think at the college level, write at the college level, engage in critical thinking, and have an experience that isn't just history or just English or just any one thing, but introduces you to the diversity of the liberal arts. And when I first began with this class, it's gone through all sorts of different names, as you might imagine, with college curriculum, it changes a lot. But when I started, I was told, don't make it just another history class. And I'm kind of like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm a history professor. What am I, help. And then I got to thinking, well, what other things do I love and I would feel comfortable and I want to share with my students? And it suddenly struck me, it's like, okay, well, Sherlock, if I teach Sherlock Holmes stories, that's going to introduce them to some literature. That's going to introduce them to some history. We can use the stories, I call it as a springboard for learning more about history. And of course, it will also introduce them to the idea of using your brain, not your emotions, using logic and reason and learning how to observe. And so I always tell the students at the start, this class it's not a philosophy class. It's not a purely deductive reasoning class. This class is based mainly on a quote from Sherlock Holmes. You see, but you do not observe. I want to help you learn to see the world and observe it as well, because seeing is a passive act. Observing is when you see something, but you also think about it, you engage with it. And think how much richer the world will be to you if, when you see things, you also think about what you're seeing and play with what you're seeing and ask questions about what you're seeing. And that is going to benefit you. No matter what it is, you end up studying as a major in college, whether you go into one of the sciences, whether you go into the humanities, whether you become an accountant, whatever, you're going to be helped by having this skill. And something I also try to share with them is the idea that if you learn about Sherlock Holmes, and you learn about like our secret words, like the canon and the sacred writings and the daintiest thing under a bonnet and all of that. When you leave Wofford and you go out into the big wide world, there are Sherlockians everywhere. There's a Sherlock Holmes Society in Tokyo. There are Sherlock Holmes societies literally every major city in America. You have a built-in group of friends who speak your secret language. And so this is like a little gift to you that you may not realize how valuable it is here as a freshman when you're thinking about joining a fraternity or a sorority or playing football or whatever. But in years to come, you may find this is a very valuable way for making friends. I've made friends all over the world just by knowing about Sherlock and being involved in this community. And so I have had some who have gone on and joined societies, and then I get a note saying, "Hey, Dr. Revels, I saw something about Sherlock. I thought of you." And it's a wonderful connection to have with young people.
The course is also, though, you teach Sherlock Holmes methodologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
how would you and then you take that methodology and you have them split into teams, groups of 8 each, and one group studies Jack the Ripper case and the other studies the Lizzie Borden case. So start with the methodology part. How do you teach them? Do they just read the stories to learn the methodology, or do you guide them through the stories to underline and underscore how he thinks about things and sees things that other people don't notice in order to solve the crimes that he does?
Right. Well, I always try to remind them. Holmes says, to a great mind, nothing is little. To a great mind, nothing is little. We have to pay attention to everything. So, in sort of a practical way, when I start the class, I do like about 3 or 4 lectures, which of course I don't like, but 3 or 4 lectures on sort of the world of Doyle, on the canon itself, on how Sherlock Holmes has been translated into movies, plays, all the different ways we encounter Holmes. And then I have them start reading. And we start usually with a study in Scarlet, because that is the first, it's a novel, but it's a short one. It's the introduction of Holmes. And then we read about between 15 to 20 cases of the short stories. I don't try to have them read the whole canon. I would have a riot if I asked them to read 60 over the course of a semester. But I try to pair them sort of by theme. So here are 2 cases that deal with the nobility. Here are 2 cases that focus on women. Here are 2 cases that focus on sporting events. And I ask them, what is Holmes doing every time? Who comes to him? What's the problem? How is he approaching the problem? And I'm always talking about questions. Holmes doesn't assume things, and he says he doesn't guess. Now, in reality, he does sometimes, but in theory, he doesn't make any guesses. He doesn't make any assumptions. He takes what he's given, he asks questions, he collects data. And I'm always saying you have to collect data. You have to go out and find things, find answers to your questions. And then you begin to develop a theory, and then you can begin to test that theory or not. So we really do a lot of reading and talking about the cases. They do a little bit of historical, excuse me, inquiry. And then the big project is at the end. And this is what you're talking about when I split them. The class is always 16, so we split them 8 each. And one side, they're Team Jack, and the other is Team Lizzie. And I tell them, I said, you need to learn as much as you can. You need to be able to tell the class the basic parameters of what happened, but you need to go at it like Sherlock Holmes would. What kind of questions would he ask? Those are the questions you need to be asking too. Who would he want to talk to? Well, you can't go back in time and talk to these people, but can you find any interviews or transcripts with them that might guide you? And at the end of it, I asked them, what do you think Holmes would say? Would Holmes find Lizzie Borden the culprit, or would he suggest that somebody else committed this crime? And then I'll also ask them, what do you think? Sometimes those are the same, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't always come out with the same answer because obviously every year you've got a different group of students, and some students are more into it than others are. But I was really amazed one year that I had a group that I guess I could have sent them back to the 19th century because at the end they said, Lizzie couldn't have done it. Ladies don't do things like that. I'm like, really, guys?
You didn't tell them people kill for money all the time.
I'm like, come on. But they're like, oh no, she sounds like she was so nice. And sometimes that's kind of amazing that you get. And for a moment, I wondered if it's, most of my students are like me, Southern. And I felt, well, maybe they just think nice little ladies. I don't know. But then another group one year said, they couldn't say Bridget did it, but they thought Sherlock would have wanted to investigate Bridget a lot more than they thought she'd been looked into. I think I had one year that said, we think Lizzie and Bridget did it together and were covering for each other.
Uh-huh.
And then
Anybody suspicious of Mr. Morse, John Morse?
I don't think I've ever had a group go towards him, which has surprised me because I would think they would be. This is somebody else who was in the house, but they tend to get really focused on Lizzie, and of course they get really obsessed with the violence of it. How could somebody just chop his head? They are always amazed when they see the photographs that they're actual crime scene photographs, and I tell them, look at that. How do you think Holmes might have used a photograph? This was a new part of police investigation in his time.
Right.
So a really good group will do wonderful things with it. I think I had one group one time that somebody acted out Lizzie and was being sort of interviewed because I give them a lot of freedom with how they want to present it, how they want to define it for the class.
Does each person on the team have a different role?
I encourage them to do that. I said, it's going to work a lot better if you divide this out with one person doing this part of the research, one person doing the other. But I said, you need to meet and compare notes because you can't go into it with only your little part of the case. That's not going to give you a full picture. And sometimes they really amaze me. I feel like it's a neat assignment.
It sounds neat to me. I would have loved to have a class like that in college.
I love to sit back and listen to what they can produce. So it's always a fun thing for me at the end of the semester to sort of let them, I tell them, this is your chance to be the teacher today. This is your chance to be the instructor, and you're teaching your classmates. And I always encourage the other 8 people to just, give them the daylights, just really pick it apart and ask tough questions,
because they've done the same for their
They've done the same for theirs. So I kind of try to pit them against each other a little bit because I think a little friendly competition is a good thing for students. And then at the very end of the class, their final thing they have to do for me, I said, you have to do one creative thing. So it could be a poem, it could be a limerick, it could be a drawing, it could be, and sometimes they do this in a group as well. I've had a lot of little funny videos that they've
I was wondering about videos, yeah.
Oh, yes. We've had some modern takes on some of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I said, I'm not going to grade you on this is a great story or not a great story, but I want to see you play with Sherlock Holmes. And I love that part of the class because sometimes I get really funny stories. Sometimes I have gotten last year, a young lady made a crocheted deer stalker for me. It was
Ooh,
a mini one though. It was only about, 2
but
inches big, so I
still,
couldn't wear it, but still. And I remember one student did a Sherlock Holmes movie poster, but it was like a Pulp Fiction movie poster. It
oh,
was so I really want the young people to see Sherlock as a mental tickle. It's the most fun you can have with your brain, trying to solve these puzzles, whether they are literary puzzles or real life puzzles, like Lizzie Borden. It's kind of fun. I always tell them this is fun.
right,
Counting will not be fun.
right,
Your biology class may not be fun, but if you'll let it be, this is fun.
right. Do
Uh,
they find that frustration in the cases that they have where there's not enough information or the right kind of information? They're so used to watching true crime stuff that's modern with forensics and DNA and ways to prove things scientifically
mhm,
that didn't exist back then at all. And for instance, in my pet peeve is in the inquest. Lizzie Borden, like she's on the stand like 3 days on the stand at the inquest. And the questions that she asks seem halfway. There's no follow up. The questions are not, when she contradicts herself or when she says something the opposite, she's not really held to account for that. They just sort of, they're polite about it. So
mhm.
there's not a lot of, I mean, they didn't ask a whole bunch of questions I would have asked. So do
Right.
your students ever feel like that where what you've got is not enough?
Sometimes the really good ones will pick up on that and they'll be like, "God, shouldn't there be more here?" Or where can I get this and this? They do. Now, I will admit that freshmen can be pretty lazy.
Oh,
You
that's true. I forgot we're talking about freshmen.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we are talking about freshmen and even the ones I don't want to certainly bag all of them because I have
No,
wonderful
no, not
people,
at all.
but a lot of them are so impatient to get into what they think their major is going to be that they don't realize how valuable it is to experience some of this frustration, to understand that like every source you go to is not going to follow through the way you do, and you have to make the best with what you have, which of course is what historians do all the time. And so I'm always saying, hey, you were really kind of getting a history methodology methods class too, and we didn't tell you about it. We snuck that
Right.
one in on you. So,
And you will use it the rest of your
of
life.
your life.
Yes.
Exactly.
That kind of training is unbelievably important. Just you'll know how to do it. You'll know what sources to trust. You'll know how to find a source. You'll know primary sources from secondary sources, from opinion, from newspaper, yellow journalism stories. You'll get a hankering and an understanding of truth that helps you kind of wend your way through modern life, don't you think?
Exactly. If there's ever a time we need discernment and
Mhm.
critical thinking and questioning sources, it is right now.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I especially appreciate, and I want to sort of give a little shout out to, is our Wofford research librarians, because we combine when we start doing both when we do the days for just the sort of history research and we do the Lizzie Borden and Jack days, our research librarians come in and they walk them through. They walk them through the paces. They show them in real time good websites, bad websites. This is what an academic journal looks like. This is what a good newspaper looks like. And they're warning them, you don't want to be using Billy Bob's Borden bang up site. That's not, no, go to a site that's done by the Historical Society. Go to a site by museum. Look at academic journals. And it's a wonderful exercise for the young people, which again, I think the really smart ones, they get it. Oh, this is valuable to me going forward. And because most young people are sort of, they like drama, they like crime, they watch mysteries on TV, that maybe this is a little bit more exciting to them than just, let's talk about the symbolism of purple in this story.
Right, right,
I'm hoping that, and this is why I tell anybody who say, well, this doesn't seem very serious, you gotta have a hook or a
right.
hatchet in this case, maybe, or an axe. We gotta have something to get the young people interested. And then once they get interested, they're gonna have really valuable tools.
Well, you picked the two cases of the Victorian era that are unsolved.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't, it's not about them supporting or not supporting the ruling of the courts in either case. It's who did it. It's a who, both of them are whodunits. There's so many people that could have done it in the Jack case that the list is miles long. And a
Uh-huh.
new book comes out every year that says, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I figured it out, you know. And the Lizzie case, similarly, every couple of years, there's a new book that comes out and says, oh, I figured it out. And this is the answer. And yet nobody's got it yet. And nobody will ever get it because there's just not enough evidence to prove any one person, any particular person is
And,
the culprit.
and
And
that's
that's frustrating, but it's also what makes Lizzie Borden and Jack the Ripper cases that will be studied forever.
exactly. It's what makes them such good exercise for building an argument, for mustering your data, for mustering what did I find out, what did I learn, and then someone else making a counter argument saying, but what about this? What about this piece of information? And it might be an unpopular opinion, but I kind of hope Lizzie Borden and Jack the Ripper never get solved.
But no, I don't think they ever will. So I think you're safe there.
I hope so. I think that
There's
it's some,
no way any definitive answer could be discerned
yeah.
where it's given the imprint. I mean, every time a book comes out I know in the Jack the Ripper case, and they have, this is the answer. Boy, everybody on Casebook Jack the Ripper website, which is the
Mhm.
oldest forum for Jack the Ripper studies in the world, continuous, they jump on that. And it's like, absolutely not. Pick them apart, pick them apart, pick them apart. And the same thing with the Lizzie Borden. So the forum that I run, the Lizzie Borden Society Forum, it's the oldest forum on the Lizzie case in existence in the world. And it's still in operation. And it's the same kind of thing. People are like kinder, I think, in the way they pick things apart. Whereas Jack the Ripper,
Good.
they actually have bar fights. So but they have regular conferences on Jack the Ripper and
Mhm.
Jack the Ripper studies, and there are considered scholars on Jack the Ripper. Now there's considered scholars on Lizzie Borden, but we have no conferences. We have no get-togethers. We don't go to bars and hang out and fight each other over our theories. That's a completely different world. I have a question about your involvement in that part of the course. When you send them off on their way, do they come back to you and with questions and guidance, or do you just leave them to their own devices? I mean, how I know you said you send them to the library and they learn about sources and they find things that way, but how much of it is hands off or hands on?
I will tell them once we set it up, I said, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. But if you have questions for me, if you're like, I'm sort of stuck on this point, can you help me find something? I said, I'm always there for you to help, but I'm not going to come into class and we're going to look at this, and
Oh,
this.
okay, okay.
And so of course, again, a student who really gets into it will often come and say, well, what about this piece of information? Or I read this. Do you have something else? Um, but the ones that are lazy are not quite interested, or it's almost Christmas and they're ready to go home. They don't show up. But I do try to always be accessible for my students. And try to show them, you're in a new environment now. This is not high school where we're going to hold your hand as much, but we are also a great resource and available for you.
It must be great for a freshman to have the experience of a teacher trusting them to go off and do their thing and trust that their work will produce the project goals and then come back and present it to everybody else, which is a fun thing. And like you said, the lazy ones, they'll rely on the girls to do the work for them. I mean,
Oh my goodness, it's always the girls who
it's
do
always the girls that do all the work. Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
always.
So that happens in any class that you take. Yeah. But the ones that get into it and think of it as a jolly good piece of fun as well as learning something great, I mean, they're going to be smitten with you. That's for sure.
I hope so. I try hard. I'm always telling them on the first day or so, they're all so nervous and tense. I'm like, just take a deep breath and relax. This is a class you're allowed to have fun with here at Wofford. And I know some of my colleagues teach very intense classes. Like there's one class where they look at torture, the history of torture, or dystopian novels. And I'm glad people do that. I mean, that's a different perspective, but I just had to go with something I loved and going with the world of Sherlock and these real life cases. It's a lot of fun for me. And teachers have to have fun too. Professors have to have fun too, or we burn out really fast.
Do you have a waiting list on your class, or does it pretty much even out with the 27 or whatever
It,
teachers that are?
it's funny for students with freshmen, they all register in the summer. And the only thing they have to base it off is the title of the class, which is called The Games Afoot, Sherlock Holmes and the Liberal Arts, and a little blurb about it. And usually, I have had one student one time, this was so funny. She threatened to drop out of Wofford unless they put her in my class. And she had come with this amazing like SAT score and stuff. So I guess that was the only time like administration was actually, will you take one extra? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take that one. And she really wants to get in here. And she's a lifelong Sherlockian now.
Oh, that's great.
So, but usually it's sort of luck of the draw. But the nice thing is many of my students that have me for LIBA will then want to have me for History 111
Right.
or the Writer's Workout, which is my interim. And that's wonderful when you build a relationship with a student through 2, 3, 4, or even a major. That's part of what makes, I think, Wofford a very special place. We're still small enough that you can really get to know professors, and there's nobody's a grad student teaching class. We don't even have a whole lot of adjuncts working
Oh,
for
really?
us.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we're very instructional focused at Wofford. Now, of course, people still do research and write and all that, but we really want to put the emphasis on the students and the student experience.
How many students are enrolled at Wofford?
I'm trying to remember. I think we're at 1,600 now.
Oh,
We were only at
1,600.
we were only at 1,100 when I came, so we've grown. We're a lot bigger than when we were when I came.
I'm sorry. I went to Penn State. There were
Oh, of course.
50,000 students, 10,000 graduates, and 40,000 undergraduates. You
Yeah,
were a dot in a sea, you were, and yet
exactly.
it was a really good experience because of the diversity of that huge population. And this town is only about the school. So it's all about the university, and it's in the middle of nowhere.
Mhm.
So you're isolated. You have 7 mountains surrounding you, and you're in Happy Valley. So you have to really drive a long way to get anywhere. So you're in a valley with a bunch of other people, but everybody comes to you. So artists and musicians and culture, and everybody wants to go and entertain at Penn State. So you get exposed to so much. I can't imagine teaching at a small school like that.
It's very different. I was lucky. I went to what's now a community college, but we called them junior colleges way back in
Right.
the day. And it was very small, and used to joke about it was 13th and 14th grade because you met
Hmm.
a lot of your classmates and people that you knew from other schools in the area. So that was a small class, really get to know your teacher's environment. And then
This was Florida?
this was in Florida. This was
Okay.
at North Florida Junior College in my hometown. So I was there for 2 years. And then I went to Florida State to finish out my undergrad. And
Right.
then, of course, like you said, you're one person in a 200-person auditorium. And it's very, very different.
Yes.
But then very quickly, I was in graduate school, which of course then shrinks back down
Mhm.
somewhat. So you're in smaller classes. So I'm glad I got to have both experiences before I came to Wofford, and I did teach at Florida State, like most people do. I was a TA, and I had my own class, and my first class was 50, and my second class was 110. And I
Mm.
like to say that's why I have such good teacher voice, because that was a big auditorium, and I didn't have a microphone. And then I was at 1 year at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia.
Uh-huh.
So it was somewhere in between. It wasn't nearly as big as FSU, but it was a good bit bigger than Wofford. And I had about 40 kids per class. Now my largest class at Wofford is 25.
Wow. It
And
makes grading a lot easier, doesn't it?
it does make grading a lot easier, and it makes just getting to know them and
Hmm.
know something about, this kid's from a big town, this kid wants to go to medical school, this kid's a wonderful singer, you really do, and you get to see them grow. I'm always amazed that kids will come in, freshman year, especially boys, and they're kind of scrawny, and then when they graduate, you're like, whoa, you just grew up,
Right.
you're bigger, you have better ideas, you're more interesting, all of those things. It was the right place for me, and I knew that in the first year that I was here, and that's why I'm grateful that I got to build my entire career at Wofford. From
And it's a private school?
It is a private school.
Okay.
We are loosely affiliated with the Methodist Church, but we're not really what I call a church school. We're a
Right.
classic liberal arts school.
Well, that's great. That just sounds great. That I just can't imagine a small school. I've only ever been to big schools.
No.
So I can't even imagine like the quiet core of like the quad and people going from class to class and there only being the same 1,600 people as opposed to not knowing any faces and not knowing who anybody is, and glomming onto your professors because they're the people that will guide you through this course because you're lost in a sea of people in a
Well,
good way, in a good way.
I will tell you that one thing big schools and small schools have in common is everybody complains about the parking. Even at Wofford, it's constant. Why don't we have better parking? I couldn't, park close to my bed. I was like, oh my God, go to a big school, kid. Really?
Right. Try that. Yeah.
Try
Your
that.
course is all about research and reading and writing, and your teaching outcomes include critical thinking and the basics of research. So, do you let the students steer themselves to resources on the cases that they study, or do you allow them to go ask the librarian at the research center, the library about good good sources, or do you give them a handout on what not to look at or what to look at, or do you let them figure it out themselves? I mean, how does
We,
that happen?
we do a lot of sort of introductions where we try to cover a lot in a fairly short amount of time. One of the things that the librarians do for us is great is they will build like a web page with some of the sources that we know are really, really good, and we'll put those on there, and contact information and all of that. But I try to really encourage them to be as independent as they can be, because I think that getting that drive to go and be independent is important, because so many of them, especially after COVID, have had everything handed to them. And we're sort of trying to build that up. But also to add to, when you come to grade it, or with most of my assignments, they don't get graded the first time. I'll say, come on, bring it to me. Let's go over it. Let me ask you some questions about it. Let's say, maybe this is not a particularly good source to use because who built this website? You're using a YouTube video. What makes that person an expert? Did they put anything on their video to show where they were getting their information? Or is this just, two guys popping a beer and doing a podcast? What are their we talk a lot about what are your credentials here? What proves that you're an authority on this subject?
Okay, I love the idea that the first time they do any assignment, it's not graded, that they go back and do it again. Because writing is rewriting and everything is about making things better because the first stab at it is always not enough. It's always not enough.
And why is that so hard to convince a young person of, or some older people of?
Because they think they're brilliant the first time out and it's done. Yay, it's done. And I can move on to the next thought.
I remember one young person telling me, oh, but I work so much better under pressure.
That's an excuse.
Oh my goodness. It's
How about I'm a perfectionist, so I can't ever complete anything because it's not ever to the level that I want it to be.
oh my goodness. I always tell them, I said, please don't bring me a paper that is smoking. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, it's smoking because you just got out of the printer and you're having to wave it around. And it's so hot because you just wrote it and you haven't thought about it. And one of the things I really try to share with them is in my own writing. Let's say, look how many times I had to go back and rewrite and scribble through this. And usually when you write, you're not always going to have the most active sentences, and we want active rather than passive sentences. And just trying, sometimes I'll put something up with my own marks through to say, look, I've been doing this for like way before you were born. Okay. Mm-hmm. Some of you, I taught your parents, and that is literally true. I think I've had 8 now that I taught that one or more of their parents. And the word is out at Wofford when someone shows up and says, hey, you taught my grandmother, I am out the door. I am gone. No, I'm not teaching any grandchildren. But just to get them to understand that we all have to write, rewrite. Good writing is good thinking. Good thinking leads to good writing. But something written in a hurry, I don't know, maybe Ernest Hemingway could do it, maybe, but I'm not Ernest Hemingway. I want to work at it. And there's a certain pleasure in writing and rewriting and seeing yourself do something better.
Do you have access to Conan Doyle online, perhaps, revisionary work on the stories that you can show? He didn't sit down and write this in one fell swoop. Look, he went through all these various revisions.
That's a good idea. I haven't done that, but I may start doing it this semester because I know I've seen photographs of some of the manuscripts where you can see the lines marked out. And I always tell them, I said, there's some lessons from Doyle that we need to learn. Like sometimes he just didn't go back and read his own stuff. And that's why Watson's wound is wandering, because it's in his leg in one story and in his shoulder in another. And that's a pretty interesting wound now. How did it move around? So I'm always saying, you need to go back into what you've already said before, make sure you're saying the same things.
So that's an editor's job mostly, isn't it? Isn't it like his editor should have figured that one out as continuity?
You would have thought so.
Yeah, because they paid people back then to do that, unlike today.
I'm beginning to think they didn't, or that once the stories, once they did become popular, then it was like, well, we're going to just let him do whatever he wants.
Because they were desperate for him to keep producing stories because he was getting sick and tired of his character. Yeah.
And they were just throwing the money at him. He'd ask for more and he'd think he'd get, and they'd give it to him. And maybe that's a good lesson for all writers. I don't know. Ask for more. But, he would, but you know what? It makes, if it's a mistake on Dole's part, which I do think it is, I think he got a little lazy. It makes so much fun for Sherlockians who play the game. And the idea of taking a text and using the text as clues and trying to make it all fit somehow and figuring out things like when was Sherlock's birthday?
So playing the game is assuming Sherlock is a real person.
Exactly. And It's so much fun. You start it with this assumption. Holmes is a real person, Watson is a real person. All these things happened, and we can figure out what order they came in. We can figure out things like when Holmes's birthday is, or where Dr. Watson might have grown up from little clues in the story. And that's just, again, you can make arguments with people. Well, I think it's this thing. I think it's this thing. Let's muster our evidence. And there's no right answer. I
Right.
mean, Doyle never told us that Sherlock's birthday is January 6th, but Sherlockians celebrate that day. And that's when the BSI weekend is the closest to that date
Wow.
because we played the game.
Because you play the game. And that education is about playing the game, isn't it? Seriously. You walk into a course and you're playing the role of student, and you want to please the teacher and you want to accomplish the syllabus, but you also want to enjoy yourself while you're doing it. So you've got to kind of figure out how to play the game, right? Which
Right.
is life, playing the game.
It's life. I can give you very quickly one of my favorite examples about sort of playing the game in real life. About this was probably 25 years ago or so. I had a student who was not doing well in class. His essays were really poorly constructed. And it was a family weekend. So we're at school on Saturday, and the father, the mother, and the student all come into my office. And the father just begins to try to browbeat me about the fact that his son has a C minus in the class and my son's going to be a lawyer and my son's essays are fine. And I don't understand why you're giving him this poor grade, yada, yada, yada. And I finally said to him, because I'm trying to be nice and polite now, I said, "Sir, I'm going to tell you why your son's getting a C minus." I said, "Instead of writing Sherlock Holmes caught the criminal, he writes, the criminal who was a bad man who lived in Victorian London in 1895 was the man who was caught by Sherlock Holmes." I said, "There's your problem." And at that instant, the wife, the mother of the boy, burst into loud laughter, slaps her husband on the arm, and says, "Oh, honey, Junior writes exactly like you do." At that instant, that man's face turned blood red. He grabbed his wife by the arm. He said, "We're done here," and ran out the door. The student looked at me, laughed, kind of giggled, and followed them out. And I sat there and I thought to myself, Dad's been writing his essays.
Yeah.
That lady just gave it away. And my observation of his reaction, how immediate it was, how embarrassed it was, how angry it was. He didn't want to argue about anything. He was just out the door. I thought, I bet Dad's been writing the essays.
And he came to you because you were giving him a C minus.
Exactly. And the next essay that young student turned in was fine. It was like a B+ essay. It was fine. And I never asked the student because I didn't want to put him on the spot. And so I
Right.
can't prove it. But I've always thought Sherlock knows you're cheating.
Yeah.
Sherlock knows. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have laid a better trap. I didn't even plan it, but I couldn't have laid a better trap. But
Oh
I
my
will
gosh.
never forget that man turning red, running out of the room, and clearly the wife knew nothing about it. I mean, she was just in it, but she'd given it away.
Right.
Oh, it was a wonderful moment. I always
Right.
share
Yeah,
that
when the
with
truth
students.
comes out and you figured it out and you don't need to say a word.
Yeah, I just sat there like, yeah, okay, all right. So yeah, it was a wonderful moment, and I'm always telling students, learning to be more observant, learning to sort of live the Sherlock Holmes life. You're always going to have fun, even if you're sitting in the airport, bored out of your mind, just watching people, trying to deduce where have they been, where are they going, what are they carrying, what are they wearing,
People watching.
people watching. Mm, Again, it's the tickle.
That's
It's
what the malls used to be about. I mean, you do your shop and then you sit in the middle and just watch people shop and guess what they were all about.
And what have we lost with online shopping? We've
Exactly. People watching. No more people watching.
glory of people watching or people deducing, as I like to call it, deducing what they've been doing. I mean,
Right.
Sherlock Holmes said you could sit on a bus and figure out what everybody's occupation was.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, maybe we can't do that, but can we figure out like what they're interested in, or maybe what kind of music they listen to, or maybe something about maybe if they're well off or not so well off. I mean, there's so many things we can play with.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I
Okay.
can imagine that after teaching this class and hearing everybody else's theories and working through Holmes's understanding of things, that you might have some ideas about the Borden case. Now, you might not want to share them because you don't want to bias your future students in your classes, and I would understand that. But have you don't even without having to say what your theory is. Do you have any theories of either case?
I kind of think that Lizzie Borden might have been the luckiest woman in the world.
Well, we know that. We know
That
that.
that if she did this, then everything somehow worked out in her favor, which is pretty amazing.
There are those letters that she wrote to her friend from prison
Hmm.
that have surfaced in Parallel Lives, written by the Historical Society, Michael Martins and Dennis Bennett, that paints a picture of her as being sure of her conviction, that she knows she's going to get convicted and she's very depressed about it, that she doesn't see a way out, which is interesting because she doesn't say anything during the trial. So she's stoic and reserved, and she says, I let my attorney speak for me, and doesn't ever talk about it her whole life. But you get a sense from these letters to her intimate friend that she, in fact, is unsure of her future and how this is going to play out in her conviction or acquittal. And that to me is telling because it means she doesn't either trust the judicial system to get it right, or she thinks they're onto her. I mean, it could be either way. It really could. So you can't say, oh, this is evidence of guilt at all. It's
Mhm.
evidence of a depression, of being
Right.
in prison awaiting trial for murder, is what it really is, basically. But people have lighted onto that as evidence of guilt, and I don't think it can be sort of labeled that way definitively, because there's
Mhm.
too many. It's a context.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's just what I think about
Uh-huh.
those kinds of informational things that come out in dribs or drabs
Mhm.
that we still have access to today, that nobody ever saw before. And all of a sudden this book comes out and there's primary source material from Lizzie's hand that says such and such. Now, of course, she never made a confession, and she never
Right.
said she did it. And she never did an interview, and she never talked about it. So
But it's always so exciting to find a relatively new primary source.
it is. It is
Really.
very exciting. And I think the Parallel Lives is a massive book. It's like
Mhm.
1,700 pages or 1,100 pages or something. And it's massive. It should have been 3 volumes, but there's material in there that shapes her as a human being
Mhm.
beyond the trial, and her life after, and the friends that she had, and her travels, and her interests, and her love of animals, and her beneficence, and her giving, and her kindnesses.
Right.
And so it's weird to, pre Parallel Lives, all we had is this sort of stark kind of Victorian female understanding of her based on newspaper reports and the trial itself and things like that. But now we have this personal side to her and her relationships, the people who worked for her.
Mhm.
And you get a more sort of well-rounded understanding of her as a human.
Mhm.
It still doesn't answer the question of who did it. It still doesn't say that she could have done it or she couldn't have done it. There's there's not anything that could open your mind and say, that's it. She obviously, except that when she dies without guilt.
Mhm.
So I don't know what that means, whether she worked through it or whether she had nothing to work through. You
Yeah.
know, we don't
And
know.
and you bring up a really good point about just history in general, is that so many times when young people approach history, they think of figures in history, they're kind of like marble statues or cardboard cutouts.
Mhm.
So many students tell me, oh, my history class was they handed me 100 dates I had to
Oh,
memorize,
no.
and that's all they've had. So I'm a social historian by training. So I'm really interested in how people live their day-to-day lives. And therefore, I'm always trying to get my young people to think about everybody we're going to talk about, whether they're famous or not so famous, was a human being just like you are.
Hmm.
And often at the end of that first day of class, after I make my whole pitch about what is history and how is it different to what you've sort of envisioned it and all of that, I'll often say, take your hand like this, put your finger right here. What do you feel? And some of them will be like trying to figure out what I'm getting them to do. And then finally somebody will say, well, I feel my pulse. I'm like, guess what? You have that in common with everybody. Everybody. They could do exactly that thing you're doing right now. So as we go through this, just remind yourself every day, these are not characters. These are not somebody just on money. This is somebody that just like got up in the morning and thought about what am I going to do today? Or they had, things they felt guilty about or things they
They
worried
went through
about.
depression and they had
They went
mental
through
illness and they had,
depression.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
always stress to them that I am utterly convinced that both Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis suffered through major bouts of depression. And think about, what that means. And
Right.
so I hope some of them, some of them will sort of like, are we going to fight a battle? You
Oh,
know.
wait, wait, I just thought of something. You know how Lincoln was this impending doom that he felt was coming and he dreamt about it, which could be
Dream.
tied to his depression, that he felt a sense of impending doom and then he's assassinated. And then Lizzie, the night before the murders, goes to Alice Russell's house and says something bad is going to happen. And it's maybe tied to her depression again, like that sense of impending doom that they both felt, that their lives would be changed forever soon, but
Hmm.
they didn't know what that meant. They had the pulse to know that something was coming at them.
Hmm.
And I think that is an interesting connection between even Lincoln and Lizzie that I did never thought of before till just this minute. But your pulse thing made me think of it. And mental illness also, or mental struggles that people go through, that you know, for instance, this is way off topic, but my interest is Arthur Miller and American theater, and my that's my expertise in my education. So, you've got Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, who is basically he either has senility, Alzheimer's thing going on, or he's in a massive state of depression, and yet nowhere does it talk about him getting help. And if he had gotten help, and if Linda had given him the help that he needed, or had, you know, pulled that nozzle that she found in the basement that he may use to kill himself, which he eventually does, and taken it away from him because she was worried about him, if she had participated in his wellness instead of in his, as women did back then, in his lies and his uh, the way he saw himself, then it would be a different story. So people didn't talk about mental illness in the family back then, and now it's much more common, and now it's much more acceptable. And you can do telehealth, mental health consultations, and there's help as a telephone call away. So we're much more open to the idea that people can seek out help
Hmm.
if you need it.
Right. Right.
And at the freshman level, I imagine there's a tremendous stress on students to perform well. Their parents are watching, they're paying for this education. They're independent because they're now adults, and yet they're struggling with their own identities and their own growth as thinkers and critical thinkers and human beings, and going through that last stage of puberty, which
Hmm.
is uh like and
Oh.
girls and boys and dating
Mhm.
and coming out of the closet and all that stuff that goes on in a freshman world, that the idea of having a class that they could go to that you're teaching where it's a safe space for all of that, I think that's what I sense anyway, because the way you talk about your students, it's a safe space.
I try very hard to make that clear to them from day one. And one of the things that is also in sort of our materials that we're all supposed to cover to some degree is the idea of growth and growth mindset. And I always say I do some things better than others, but I'm always telling them, look, I'm not a counselor,
Right.
but I know a lot of counselors, and I have a telephone on my desk. And if you come to me and you say, I feel like I need help with so and so, all I got to do is pick up that telephone, call the switchboard. In 30 seconds, they'll have me to the right person, and I'm going to get you the help you need.
Right.
I will always be there to do that for you. And
Do these cases ever trigger anything like that?
I don't, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Nobody said, well, no, wait, I take it back. I take it back. There was one young lady who came in one day and we had just read The Speckled Band, and she came in and she slammed her book down on the table and she's like, I hate you, looking at me. And I'm like, what did I do? And she says, I can't sleep at night now. You made me read this story and there's a radiator in my room that's hissing.
Oh no.
And she says, I just can't sleep. And I'm like, I assure you, there's no bed rope in the dorms. There's no
Right.
swamp adder doesn't exist. Okay. And she was being playful, but she didn't say that case gave her nightmares.
Wow. That's interesting.
Never. I mean, I've read so many things that are so much gorier, mysteries and all. That to me, Sherlock Holmes seems very tame, but there was something about the mental image of the snake coming down the bell rope and then the little hiss of her radiator. And
Well, now you know she really read the story.
I do, exactly. I told her, I said, well,
She
kudos
internalized it. So yeah.
for internalizing the story. But no, though I always do say, especially if a story's got a mention of suicide in it, these are topics we need to be sensitive about. And I do tell them that even in studying Scarlet, I said, this is not an accurate portrayal of the Mormons. And I want you to understand that. But I want you to understand, why would people in the Victorian world have thought this was accurate or would have seen them as a good villain for a story? Who do we cast without thinking as villains today? What will they say about us in 200 years? So the story's there's just so many avenues to explore,
Oh,
so
wow.
many things to go down. They never get old to me. I try every class to reread my story the night before, make sure I reread it, and I don't mind doing it. I just love revisiting them so much.
Oh, that's great. Now, I know you're especially interested in the Victorian world and women, especially including true crime from that era,
Mhm.
obviously. Can you tell us how you think the era may have affected Lizzie Borden's choices in her life?
Certainly. Well, I look at the 19th century as kind of jumping off point for women. That's when we start getting rights slowly but surely. And by the way, I love the 19th century because I feel like it's far enough in the past to feel quote unquote historical, but I can still recognize people. It's not like studying ancient Rome. It feels so different to me, or the Renaissance, even, that just feels so far way back in the past. It's like it's the past, but it's kind of almost a touchable past in a way. And certainly when I think about American women, I think about the impact of the Civil War, and especially for Northern women, like Lizzie would have been, that suddenly women are starting to have doors open to them, to nursing, for example, or to going there. This is the same time where more women's colleges are being opened. It's becoming more acceptable.
And teaching.
And teaching too, for women to go and have careers. But at the same time, Lizzie has always struck me as being, in a weird way, a prisoner of social class. She is a Borden in a town where the Borden name means a lot, where she would not have been expected to go past high school. She's not pushed to college or anything. And I have often wondered, how would Lizzie's life have been different if she could have gone on? It seems to me like she liked teaching Sunday school. Maybe she should have been a teacher, She would have had more choices. She might could have been in her own house, making her own choices about that. But then there's that social pressure. And especially after you're a certain age where you're going to be a spinster. You're just going to, like, you're never going to change. That is going to be your thing forever. And I grew up in a small town that was a little behind the times, shall we say. And I was single for a very long time. And I would often, when I was at home, sort of feel that pressure. People like, oh, you're going to come home and take care of your mama, aren't you? That's everybody defines you. And that is how I see Lizzie in a certain way. She's being defined by her society and put in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if we believe that she might have killed her father and her stepmother, then she has chopped her way out of that box in a pretty dramatic fashion. And, we talk about breaking the glass ceiling. Well, she's busted it wide open.
Oh my God. That's so great. That is so great.
You know,
That metaphor is perfection.
oh, good. I'm happy. But, we always, like when we do Women's History Month, we're always talking about, these women who made great contributions and did these great things. Sometimes women might do things that are not great, that are bad, that are breaking the law, but they're kind of, breaking their ceiling too.
Right.
And so that's what I try to get young people to think about, that especially when we're talking about women.
And her spinsterhood could be completely tied to the Civil War. All the men were dead. I mean, there's not a lot of men to go around after that, and so a vast quantity of women who were not lesbians were
Right,
spinsters. It
right.
didn't mean that you were a lesbian if you didn't get married.
Of
It
course not.
meant that you didn't have the opportunity or it didn't happen. You,
To me, when I look at Lizzie's picture, she does not look beautiful, but she's not hideous.
no,
She
she's
just looks
pretty.
like
I think she's pretty. Yeah.
she's a regular woman. And I guess I have a sort of a sympathy for Lizzie and feeling like somebody has put Lizzie in a corner or in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And her legacy is that, for better or worse for her, she found she was out of that box and she's
Mm-hmm.
going to be remembered. What's the old saying by Laura Thatcher Ulrich? Well-behaved women seldom make history.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always tell my students what Ulrich meant by that statement, because she's a colonial historian, is actually that women who live, quote unquote, good lives, who are good wives and mothers, they don't show up in the historical record. But women who step out of the bounds, somehow they have a quarrel with their neighbor, they're accused of being a witch, they have a court battle, somehow we can find them. So a lot of what we learn about women is actually through studying the kind of deviance, if you will, among them. And that's what she actually meant. Now, a lot of us take that another way too. We can't be well behaved. We got to stand up for our
No,
rights.
it's just that
But
being uppity has its benefits.
has
And
its benefits.
yeah.
And so I think Lizzie is definitely a woman who people judged her as not, put her on trial for not being well behaved, got acquitted. And, it's just a wonderful way to bring together so many things about women's history too,
That's
along
amazing.
the line.
That's amazing what you have said. That's just amazing. I've never heard anybody put it the way you have or concisely as the way you have. And I think you have a book in there or at least a scholarly article. I'm serious.
Okay, I'll
That's
do
just
my best.
women. Lizzie in her time would be a great, I'd read that. I'd buy that. I'd
Oh,
promote
thank
that.
you.
That's sense. And in addition to your teaching at the college level, I know you write both fiction and nonfiction because you write pastiches and you write Sherlockian novels and you write Sherlockian stories, but you also write nonfiction. And can you tell us about your writing and what you're writing about now? Because I know you're like very excited about it.
I am very excited. I have been on sabbatical, which of course means a break from teaching duties. And it's been a wonderful year where I've got to write a lot of things. I've done some more writing on women in early Tallahassee and territorial Tallahassee. I've worked on a book about the writing process. But the thing I'm writing right now that I am so excited about, the tentative title is A Bloody Affair: Murder in Madison County, Florida, 1838 to 1988. My home county is very murderous. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. It's like every time you turn the page in the newspaper, somebody else, there's a shooting, there's a fight, there's something going on that someone ends up dead. And the wild thing is how often the person who made the person end up dead gets off, gets away with it.
Mm.
And so I've gone through my county's history and I found, I think it's 13 or 14 unique cases and gone through them and sort of found out what's going on here, what type of a violent event is it. To give you a few examples, in 1867, we had a school shooting in Madison, Florida. A student didn't like the fact that his teacher had disciplined him, and so he went out, got a gun, came back in, and told his teacher to apologize. The teacher said, "I'll do no such thing," and the young man pumped 5 bullets into him. The young man ran away, came back about 10 years later, and became mayor of the town and a state senator and ran for governor as well. So, yeah, and the wild thing is the young man, well, lived to be an old man, and his teacher, who didn't live to be a very old man, are buried in the same cemetery, not far from each other.
That's unbelievable.
1867. It's just wild, and it was reported all over the nation.
Wow.
We've also got one of my favorite ones, a family feud that broke out between two plantation families. And it ended with the three brothers on one side, three brothers on another side, confronted each other in the churchyard during church, emptied their pistols at each other, then went to knife fighting. Two of the brothers ended up dead, and everybody in that church ended up in the woods somewhere because, they were getting the heck out of Dodge when the shooting started. So we got the gunfight, OK Corral. We've got a man who was being chased by a posse who managed to get up in a house and hold the posse off for like an hour or so. And then they were like, oh, heck, we can't get this guy. So they went back for more and he got away for a while, but then eventually was captured. And one fight where, again, it was two sets of brothers and a brother on each side began to fist fight. And then a brother from one side said, hey, this fist fight's not going well. Let me start with the knife. And then the brother from the other side says, no, a gun is what you need. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to who survived that encounter. They all ended up in a pile on the train depot, bleeding, wounded, dying. It really, and sadly, I hate to say it, but two of the victims in these stories are women I remember. One of them was a grocer that I used to go to her grocery store every week as a child to get my weekly ice cream treat. And another one was the lady who brought our mail.
Oh,
And
wow.
so the cases go all the way up into the 80s. But
Wow.
I feel like I've learned so much about my hometown, about different regions in the hometown. And of course, the cases sort of parallel what's going on in America at this time. One of the saddest ones is that in 1945, Madison, Florida had the only lynching in that year. The only one. We had one of the first great heroes of World War II from our hometown, and at the end of the war, we had a lynching. So I feel like there's a lot to be said about history, but there's also just a lot of, whoa, I can't believe they did that, or they got away with that, or, oh my God, what did the sheriff do? That sort of thing. And I'm just having a great time with it. And I'm headed back to Florida tomorrow to try to fill in some gaps of things that I
Wow.
haven't been able to find.
That is amazing. That is so juicy good. And I can't wait till you're done so I could read it. I just think the way your brain works and the way you look at things and process information in order to sort of explain situations and context is just so unique and so interesting that I'm a fan. I'm a total fan. And I haven't read anything you've written, but I bet you it's good stuff. I bet you it's great stuff.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to give Sherlock a lot of credit. I
Oh
think
yeah,
him at
your mentor.
11 had a big impact on me.
That's great. That's great. So you're applying Sherlock now to even your own writing. There you go. Oh man. Thank you so much for this conversation. I have learned a great deal. You have pushed me in various directions that I never thought possible. And your spirit and your enthusiasm as a teacher and as someone who guides their students through their lives of their courses with you, it's just an inspiration to me. So I just think you're all that and more. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank
Oh,
you.
this is great. This is so great. Thank you for listening to the Lizzie Borden Podcast, episode 37. We've been speaking with Dr. Tracy J. Revels about her unique approach to teaching freshmen at Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, to consider how Sherlock Holmes would have investigated the Lizzie Borden case. Find Richard Barron's Lizzie Borden Girl Detective stories at Amazon.com and at LizzieBordenGirlDetective.com, where you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Listen to more Lizzie Borden podcasts on our website or on Podbean, Audible, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Please consider supporting this podcast through a subscription on Patreon. Thank you.